Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Good afternoon. This is Louis Gray here with Google Developers Live. We've started a little bit late, but we're really excited here to go ahead and talk with you and introduce you Don Dodge. He's a developer advocate in the developer relations team for Google. My name is Louis Gray, as I mentioned before. I run Google Developers Live, and between the two of us, Don and I have had a lot of experience not only working at startups, but working with startups, covering startups, talking to people who do startups. And it might not seem the case because Google is such a large company, but we really are especially interested in entrepreneurship, VC investing, angel investing, and finding out what are the next applications, services, and people to really make a difference in technology. So I wanted to see if, Don, you could have an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Don Dodge. I work at Google Developer Relations, and I work with startups mostly all across the world. I live in Boston area and work in Mountain View and travel all over the world to find the most exciting startups that we can find.
And how did you end up at Google, Don?
Well, most people know me from Microsoft or Google. I worked at Microsoft and did a similar job there in developer relations and worked with startups and venture capital people.
Right.
Was there for 5 years, and now I'm at Google Developer Relations doing a similar job, and I've been here for 3 years.
So now,
the interesting thing, though, is most of my career was spent at startups.
Right.
I was involved in 6 of them, and most of my career was with startups, yet most people know me from Microsoft or Google.
Right. That's pretty common, as you can understand, with people paying so much attention to the big companies like Microsoft and Google who make a lot of the products we use every day. It's easy to know you from the big visibility, but the startup world is a very interesting space. I used to say that Google's the biggest startup I've ever worked for. There's a lot of things about Google which feel like a startup and other things that feel like a big company. And so there are definitely attributes to working on small teams, starting with incredible ideas and trying to innovate that define what a startup is. As someone who's gone through successful and maybe less successful startups as I have, it would be interesting to get your take a little bit on, first, what a difference is between a startup and a big company. When do you pass that threshold? And then second, what are some of those ingredients that make a startup grow to the next level?
Interesting. Startup is a overused term and not very well defined. Startups can be 2 people or 200 people, and maybe as large as 2,000. But most times people think of startups being less than 3 years old, less than a couple of million in revenue, and probably less than 50 employees. Mm-hmm. That's what I tend to think of as a startup. But there are much larger companies that work like a startup and act like a startup. So it's not an easy thing to define.
And we talked about the transition from that startup phrase to what we call, be it a young company in the growth phase. Sometimes I often see people make the mistake of confusing public companies versus private companies as being a definition for a startup. You look at companies like Twitter and Facebook, for example, who were in the private phase for a lot longer than was traditional. Maybe 10 years ago, you would see people go public before they had profitability. You would see companies go public just after they started achieving revenue. And it looks like these other companies like Facebook and Twitter had made a conscious decision to avoid the public market scrutiny, to avoid some of the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements that were there because those requirements have changed. Do you find that you can actually act like a startup when you're a public company, or maybe there are private companies that have already moved beyond that stage and just can be continuous but don't label themselves as startups?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the lines have blurred between startup and regular company and private company and public company. So the lines have blurred a bit. For me, the difference is if you're profitable, you're probably no longer a startup. So I just look at, are you a profitable company or not? And if you're profitable, then you're out of the startup phase. Whether you're public or not is a different matter.
I've worked at a company for 8.5 years, a company called Blue Arc. It was a network storage provider. And when I first joined, they were at first customer ship phase. It was very exciting. We got coverage from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and all of the technology rags. And then through the next 8 years, we went through a number of phases. For first customer ship to first product, second product, third product. We filed for IPO, we withdrew, we filed for IPO again. And from 8 years through, it was like, there were things about us that were startup-like, but we hadn't achieved profitability yet. And you had to constantly try to fight and have people understand that you were viable. And it was interesting, just to put an end cap on that, they actually were acquired by Hitachi Data Systems last year for more than $500 million. And you'd say, well, were they ever profitable? No, they weren't. They were achieving profitability maybe in a quarter, but not for the full year. But I think it would be hard to challenge them and say they were a startup because they weren't profitable. I think it's hard to tie those two together.
Oh, sure. There are lots of public companies that are not profitable
Absolutely. And some divisions within, like the company you mentioned, Microsoft has often tried a lot of work on their online services side and never made a profit. And it's interesting to look at acting like a startup within a big company, and you let revenue from one part of the company really take advantage of the other pieces that are more innovative, and maybe you can take more risk with places that you want to take new markets on. As someone like yourself, you've come to Google, you interact still with startups on a regular basis. I know you've been a judge on TechCrunch Disrupt and a number of other things. Where do you see your role in terms of the rest of the community outside of the Googleplex?
Well, most of my work is with startups and has been for virtually all of my career. So I've either worked in startups or worked with startups my entire life. Sometimes Microsoft is paying my paycheck, and now Google is paying my paycheck. But my job is working with startups and helping them be successful and finding some interesting startups that might want to partner with Google or maybe become a part of Google as an acquisition.
Right.
So for me, my whole life has been startups.
Right. Now, one thing we talked about before we went on the air, we were talking about those things that intrigue you, either as an angel investor or even a blogger to try and cover these guys. I've never been lucky enough to have the revenue available to become an angel investor, but I always saw myself as a blogger, you'd kind of be the VC arm for free. Like, I was always super excited about a product, and I would talk about it all day and let people know that this is going to be something. And it's kind of fun to look back at things like Mighty Text and Feedly and TweetDeck and social media, and some of these products that have gone from where I was covering them first ever on the blog and seeing them become viable companies or products that have hundreds of thousands or even tens of millions of users. What is it about a product or service that really sparks your idea and you say, that's something I want to invest in, or that's something I want to tell everybody about?
Well, first it has to be something that I understand and can use. So that's probably the first gate. If I don't understand what it is, if it's too complicated for me or in an area I don't really understand, then I'm probably not going to get excited about it. I've said it for a long time. Investors invest in companies that are in a business they understand or that are led by people that they know. Mm-hmm. If you don't know the people and you don't understand the business, then the chances of investing are pretty near zero.
Right. And you mentioned people. I think we could talk about whether teams versus ideas, and I think we'll get to that. But from being connected and networked as you are, I think we both see that we have friends that are established at company A, and they may go off and start their own startup. They might regroup as a team, and you find them somewhere else. Do you automatically say, look, I'm going to invest in this guy because I know he's going to do a great job? Maybe a good example is Mike McHugh, who went from Tell Me Networks and did Flipboard, and there's a guy with an established track record of history. You see serial entrepreneurs kind of just have a success, move, have another success, have another success. Do you ever get to the point where like if Evan Williams comes to you and says, I'm going to start something new, that you give him money without even asking what the product is because of their track record? And what is it that defines that kind of leadership that you think can see through an opportunity and make it happen?
Yeah, those are good questions. Serial entrepreneurs do tend to be more successful than first-time entrepreneurs. they're about 30 or 40% more likely to be successful than a first-time entrepreneur. But that's not always the case. Sometimes serial entrepreneurs get too fat and happy, too rich, and then they want to do something that maybe they're not totally committed to. And that's probably not going to be a good investment. I've seen that happen a couple of times. But if you can catch an entrepreneur on their second, third, fourth company, you've got a pretty good chance of being successful.
Now, usually a startup, and we talked about it being as few as 3 people, but always starts with one person with one idea. I've seen a lot of change in the Valley in the 15 years that I've been working here about what is critical and what's important. I think when I was first in the Valley, I remember you'd read like MacWeek magazine, and it seemed that everybody wanted to be a webmaster. And, maybe 3 years ago, everybody wanted to be a social media expert. And you've seen these waves kind of come and go and find out, what's critical to a startup. What are the type of roles that you see all sorts of startups really just overpaying for, or they're really, really looking for talent and it's hard to find? Is it design? Is it something on the back end? What is it that you think everybody is really just hopping for right now, and why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think designers are the new rock stars. So you're right. In the past, everyone wanted to be a website developer. And then a few years ago, it was all social media. Everybody wanted to do that. And more recently, it's a mobile developer or mobile games and mobile apps, that kind of thing. But what I'm seeing now is designers are the key hire. I've seen several companies that I've invested in personally where they have a great technical team, but they struggle to find a designer. And design is so important in social applications, much more so than enterprise type applications. And great designers are really, really hard to find.
Now, what does a company need to do to find this kind of talent? How do you try and prioritize when you don't have a lot of money to start with? How do you grow a team?
That's a good question too. I have people ask me, well, why can't I be a sole founder? Why do I have to have several co-founders? Or why do I have to have technical people or design people or business people or marketing people? And the answer is that you really only need the talent that you need to get to that next milestone. Maybe it's a public beta, or maybe it's releasing it for real. But whatever talent that you need to get to that level is really all you need for that time. And it can be a different mix of people as you go along. But the key thing is, why do you need more than one person to start a company? It's validation, really. Investors rarely will invest in a company that has one founder and maybe a couple of engineers. The reason is they're looking for validation. They want to know that you're a leader that can attract great talent. If you can't convince a couple of great people to drop what they're doing and come join you in your company, then it's probably not a good idea.
Now,
so
one of the things that I run into a lot, I would be asked to cover a lot of different events, be it something like TechCrunch Disrupt or 500 Startups demo days. And what was always interesting is they had a very explicit pitch. Here's what we're doing, here's the team that we have, we're positioned in this market that we know well, and here's how much money we're raising. And I think a lot of the times people get excited about the press releases that say X company has raised 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, whatever that is. And obviously with tech blogging being what it is, it's rare that you see people follow up and go, what did you do with that 5 million? And what is that 5 million for a hardware company versus 5 million for a software company? Having lived through a company that raised $250 million from venture capital, but for hardware, I can understand that the metrics are a little bit different. What do you think money from investment should be going for at different stages of a company's life? And then the second thing, as an investor, what kind of role do you think you play, as opposed to just putting money on a bet and hoping it comes back 5 or 10x?
Well, I think we've seen recently startups raise too much money. And having too much money is almost as bad as having not enough. If you have too much money, you hire too many people, you expand too quickly, you don't have that hungry, work all night kind of attitude. So as an investor, I would rather invest $1 million or so in a pre-revenue startup than I would invest in a company that's raising $10 million, because it's a whole different dynamic. The second thing is, as an investor, I can add more value to a small startup that's pre-revenue and raising a small amount of money than I can a big company that's raising 10 or 20 million.
So, what kind of impact do you mean? I mean, is it more than just the money that you're providing, or what kind of advisory role can you give? What kind of introductions can you do? What are you supposed to do after writing a check?
Well, I tell people if I wanted to be a passive investor, I would invest in the stock market and just invest in stocks. I'm not a passive investor. I'm an active investor and try to add value. So that means I'll help them find other investors. I'll help them find their Series A VCs. I'll help them get introduced to the press, TechCrunch and VentureBeat and Pando Daily and all these other outlets. I'll help them find maybe some executive talent, help them find a designer, introduce them to potential partners. So it's those kinds of things that are pretty important for a startup when they're just getting going, and less important when they're on their Series B and have raised $20 million.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit. We were talking about your history with startups. You didn't tell anybody what those are. Now, I've known because we've talked for some time, and I think it's always interesting to get behind the Microsoft, behind the Google story, and understand where you were before that. Maybe you can give us a little bit of background at those startups and kind of talk about either a success story or a challenge story that came out of any of those.
Yeah, I did 5 startups, which was most of my career, and only late in life did I join a big company like Microsoft or Google.
But you say late in life as if you're on your deathbed, sir, and I still see that your hair is brown and you walk around with vitality. So I think it's not going to be long where you say most of your life, because eventually Google will take up the plurality of your career.
Yeah, let's hope so. I started working when I was very young. But the common thread through all of the 5 startups that I did was they were the first of its kind, the first time that this technology had ever been done. So it was bleeding edge kind of stuff. And I didn't plan it that way, but once I did a couple of startups, when I went to the next one, it was always, okay, is this leading edge stuff? Is this breakthrough kind of technology? Is the startup team someone who I really respect and I can learn from? Is it something new that I haven't done before? There's an interesting story. I was one of the startups was Alta Vista. Mm-hmm. It was the first real search engine on the web, and I was running the crawler team, and later did multimedia search. So searching for images or searching for music or searching for video. And that had never been done before. So it was very exciting stuff. And there was this tiny little startup called Google, and Larry and Sergey were still in their dorm room. And I knew them then. And, I could have joined Google 12 years ago, right after Alta Vista. But, I felt I've already done that. I've done search. We invented multimedia search. And it just wasn't that interesting to me. So I didn't go to Google. Instead, I went to Napster, because Napster was something really new and interesting and never been done before.
Now, what's incredible, Don, I have to stop you for a second. Some people who are watching this video don't know what Napster was. I mean, I know that sounds wild, because I was already working in the Valley when Napster was going on, and it was quite controversial, but also very exciting as it changed the game. Tell us a little bit about Napster.
Right. So, let me back up a little bit further. Alta Vista, people might not know that, but Alta Vista was the first search engine, and the first search engine of any size, and it was the Google of its day. And this was back in 1995, 1996. So it was pretty amazing stuff. Napster was the first music sharing site, and it was a peer-to-peer kind of environment where you could share music with other people, maybe people you didn't even know, and they could share music with you. It turned out to be, at least determined by the courts, to be illegal and was shut down. And it was the precursor of all the music sharing sites that are on the internet today.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting. I was actually working straight out of college at a little company called 3Cube. And every time I say 3Cube, people go, oh, I remember, I heard about them, and they're usually thinking about 3Com or C-Cube or something like that. But 3Cube was in internet communications, and so we were doing things like internet faxing. Remember, back faxing was the thing. We did conference calling, and I still have yet to see a product better than what we offered back then. It was called PhoneCube, and you could literally get on your computer and dial out to up to 8 or 32 participants at once. You had your address book integrated, and you could call them out. And I remember talking to my mother about it, because it wasn't something like you grow up and you say, I want to work on internet faxing. But I talked to her, and all she was worried about, like, are you doing something good that's helpful for community? Are you being able to make great products and tools for users? So long as I wasn't doing evil, I know it sounds funny, Google, do no evil. But so long as I wasn't doing something that was bad, she was happy for me. And I kind of got that feedback, like it really doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether you're in music sharing, as you're saying, or search engines, or internet communications, so long as you're doing good for end users and they're seeing value. And I knew that a lot of our customers were really excited about what we were able to do. We didn't have a ton of success. And eventually the company's assets were purchased by Oracle and folded into one of their meeting suites. But we felt really good about our product. We knew that the technology was incredible, and we got great feedback from users. How do you know that you're doing the right thing as a startup, or even now? How do you know that you're providing a high-quality product? What kind of feedback are you looking for?
Well, most of my career in software, I worked in obscurity, where no one really understood what we were doing. I started my career in database software, which is arcane back-end kind of software that really isn't visible to the public. So most of the time, the work I was doing, my parents had no idea what I was doing. And for most software engineers, that's the way life is. You're working on things that are not visible to the public and not that well known, but underneath the covers can be pretty amazing stuff. And I think Alta Vista and Napster, those two companies, were the first time in my career where my mother actually understood what I did. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make it better. As a matter of fact, from a financial perspective, we didn't make money on either one of those companies. They were very well known and used by millions of people, but we didn't make any money.
The lawyers made plenty of money, if I recall.
Yeah, the lawyers made a lot of money on Napster.
Mm-hmm. So coming back to the present day, we talked about what angel investors can do to help a company. We talked about your approach and what gets you interested. If I'm a startup person, if I've just got a great idea or a great product, what can I do to reach out either to you or other angel investors or other VCs? What is it that I need to do to get their attention?
It's really easier than you might imagine. Robert Scoble posts his cell phone number on his website, and you can call him, you can tweet to him, you can put a message on his Facebook page. He's pretty accessible, and most of us are.
But Robert's not a VC, and he's not an angel investor either.
No, that's true. But the point is that most people who are in this business are very visible and easy to get to. All investors have Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus, and they're actually pretty easy to get to. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they're going to be interested or that they'll respond. The best way to get to investors is to get to someone who knows them. Mm-hmm. So I tell startup entrepreneurs all the time, talk to other entrepreneurs who have investors and ask them to introduce you to them, or talk to people who know these VCs or these angels and ask for a warm introduction. that will get you at least heard so that you can get in front of them. And then your idea has to be something that they understand, that they're interested in, and that looks like a good investment.
So what kind of ideas or markets are certainly catching your eye right now? And I think maybe if it's easier, you can go ahead and name companies that are exciting to you, whether you've invested in them or not, and if you have, let us know. But what are the types of markets that you think are really taking off or are having incredible attention?
Well, some of them are fairly obvious. I have 5 areas that I look at. So it's mobile, social, location, games, and payments. So it's those 5 areas that are pretty hot. But what I do is I look for companies that have at least 2 of those 5 elements, and preferably 3. That gives you a little better chance of success. And any company today, if you don't have a mobile component, it's hard to imagine how you're going to be successful. So you've got to have mobile. Social, that doesn't have to be there. But if it's a mobile, social, location type company, you're hitting 3 of the 5, that's probably going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. Or if it's a mobile payments company, that could be interesting. So you've got to hit at least 2 of those 5 areas to get my attention.
Now, you're an interesting guy because you've got this different background, be it Microsoft, be it Google's. You've got database experience. You have a different variety of backgrounds. What I'll often find is what interested me to either write about something or to use something is obviously I've got to be intrigued by the product as something I might want to use every day. As we all have finite time, the hard part is bringing another product into your workflow and either getting rid of something else or reducing time on something else. Do you find yourself, for example, carrying multiple devices and different laptops so you can test it all? I know I haven't seen a lot of BlackBerry apps coming my way recently, but for every Android app, every once in a while you see an iOS app. And do you feel like you have to carry all these different devices just to test the products that people want to have you take a look at?
Yeah, absolutely. I have an iPhone and an Android phone. I have a Mac and I have a PC. I have an iPad and I have a Samsung tablet. So, yeah, I have all these devices because I want to be able to use different things and try them. And yes, you're right. It is hard to get someone's attention, to have them try your new thing. But remember this, if they can't convince you to try it and take the time to try it, then they're not likely to attract the number of users that they'll need to be successful. So right. That's a good filter. If it doesn't excite you and you won't take the time to try it out, then likely a lot of customers won't either.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always would get both directions. You'd understand that, but I would also get people that almost discouragingly say, well, Louis Gray and Robert Scoble liked it, that's sure to be a flop. Because we're the weird people. We're the ones who are on the edge, who are constantly connected and looking for the new stuff. I like being the first one to join a network. I like being one of the first 10 to invite my friends and have a unique invite code that we can send out. We like being the cool one. And sometimes there's a little bit of that evangelism piece, as you understand, that makes you feel like you're part of the company, even if you don't have shares and even if you don't monetarily benefit. Like every time I read something, for example, about Jason Goldberg and the work he's done with Fab.com and prior to that Fabulous, it's like I'm a proud father and I'm excited for his success because I was part of his story with social media and being the first to write about that and see him graduate onto the next thing. I look at Ian Dodsworth of TweetDeck when he got acquired by Twitter. Again, I get nothing from it, but like a proud papa, I push the baby out the door and say, let's go. So how do you feel about some of that in terms of kind of feeling a connection with the entrepreneur, a connection with the product, even if you're not monetarily compensated for your affection?
Yeah, well, I feel the same way. I've been in the startup world my entire life, and I help startups all the time that I don't invest in. I just help them because it's what I like to do. It's part of my job at Google, and I live vicariously through these startups and what they do. So I just think it's a lot of fun. I read Louis Gray and Robert Scoble and Mike Arrington and all these other guys, and I took my cues from them. So when you wrote something about a brand new social media company, I would take a look at it. So that's another way to get visibility and get in front of investors is to come to someone like you and have you write about them. So it's an important part.
So you're saying I should start blogging again? I've not been doing a great job there, and a lot of obviously work gets in the way. But it's interesting. I want to touch on one thing before we wrap this up. You're talking about your role at Google. What is it that startups and other small or medium-sized companies can learn from using Google Apps? Is there something about Google products that you think that they should adopt right away? And what are those reasons?
Well, Google has lots of different products that are helpful to startups. So it's Google Apps, Gmail, Google Maps, Search, the location stuff. There's all kinds of things that people can use. App Engine, the Compute Engine. So if you're doing a startup that is cloud-based, web-based, mobile-based with Android, almost any startup that you can imagine is going to touch something that Google does. And most of it is easy to use, very visible, used by hundreds of millions of people, and many times free to get started. So it's a pretty obvious place to start. So the developer relations group, there's almost 200 of us now, are out there helping startups use Google products to get started and help them be successful, answer questions, get them technology that they need. So it's what we do, and I think actually the job here at Google is much easier than it was at Microsoft. Convincing startups to use Microsoft products that you had to pay for was much, much harder than it is to get them to use Google products that most of which are free, or others start out free and you only pay later when you get to scale. So it's a fun job.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I know we'd love to have you back in Mountain View for a lot of this. If I were your manager, I'd push you to be over here every day. So maybe that time will come. But definitely appreciate you taking the time late in your week. I know it's late over there on the East Coast. And I look forward to talking to you with more of these soon. Thanks a lot, Don.
Great. Thank you very much, Lewis.